Dahlia Reyes was the kind of girl who knew exactly how to navigate chaos. At just 23, she'd built a brand for herself that paid better than most people's full-time jobs. Her friends described her as fearless, charming, strategic, and always 3 steps ahead. She wasn't just another OnlyFans model, she was a survivor. Born and raised in Las Vegas, Dahlia had seen enough by the time she was 15 to understand the difference between performance and danger. And she was good at knowing where that line was. At least, until the night she didn't come back. It was December 19th, 2022, when she last messaged her group chat. A few pink heart emojis, a half-joke about meeting a high-roller client, and a selfie in the mirror of her studio apartment. She looked perfect, hair curled, lashes done, lip gloss clean. The girls in the chat hyped her up like they always did. Dahlia never told them everything, but she told them enough. And one thing they all remembered was her saying, "If he's not cool, I'm out at 10. That was the last anyone heard from her. At first, no one panicked. Dahlia was known to vanish for a day or two. Quick trips to LA, unannounced stays with sugar daddies, last-minute bookings in Airbnb penthouses. But even when she disappeared, she stayed online. A snap here, a quick DM. She was always plugged in. That's what made this feel different. The next morning, her Instagram stories didn't update, no feed posts, no new content drops. That night, her TikTok was silent. On day 2, her best friend Rosa started calling, straight to voicemail. By day 3, the group chat flipped from teasing to fear. Her friends went to her apartment. Nothing looked out of place. Her makeup was still spread across the counter. A small suitcase with outfits was missing. She'd definitely left for something planned. But her spare keys, her cat's food bowl, her passport, everything else was still there. Rosa filed the missing persons report on December 22nd. The officer on duty was polite but unbothered. "Adults disappear all the time," he said, "especially around the holidays." The official theory early on was that Dahlia had chosen to leave. The officers saw her occupation, noted her history of travel, and figured she'd gone on a private trip. No signs of struggle, no forced entry. And yet, her phone was off. Bank card unused, no flights booked, not even a rideshare from her location. She'd vanished in the middle of Las Vegas, in the middle of the night, without a single digital trace. Her account subscriptions renewed automatically, but there was no new content. Her fans began commenting, "Where's Dahlia? She hasn't posted in days." A few even unsubscribed. For a brand built on constant engagement, her silence was loud. Her mother flew in from Phoenix the day after Christmas. She hadn't known about the OnlyFans work, at least not fully. She said Dahlia told her she was freelancing in Eid and Body Media. The moment she stepped into her daughter's apartment, she broke. Everything smelled like her. The couch still had a makeup-stained throw blanket on it. Her mother sat there for nearly an hour, just staring at the door, as if waiting for her to walk back in. Police did eventually look into her phone records, and friends provided what little they knew about the last client. There was no name, just a vague mention of someone she'd met online. A new subscriber, generous with tips and promising a private meetup with no photos. It wasn't unusual. Dahlia had rules, though. She always met in public first. She always shared her location. She always checked in after. This time, she didn't. As New Year's approached, her case stalled. No new leads, no sign of her car. Her social status remained frozen, but Rosa couldn't let it go. She started emailing local reporters, begging them to care. She put up flyers, posted TikToks, and created a subreddit. Strangers began paying attention. The words, "missing OnlyFans model," hit differently. People judged, but they also watched. And in the comments, more than one person mentioned the same thing. Other girls had vanished too. Girls like Dahlia. Independent, hustling, cautious, but trusting, because they had to be. By the second week of January, the case file still sat cold on a desk in Las Vegas Metro. Her name wasn't on the news, no press conferences, just a quiet, growing fear among the people who knew her best, that she wasn't coming back. And if she wasn't, something had gone very, very wrong. But the scariest part wasn't that she was gone. It was that Dahlia Reyes had always planned for everything, every exit, every risk, every game. And for the first time, it seemed like someone had outplayed her. The last ping from Dahlia's phone came at 11:47 p.m. on December 19th, 2022, just south of Henderson, Nevada, along a stretch of industrial wasteland most locals only drive past. The signal lingered for 6 minutes near an unlit service road that cuts behind an old auto salvage yard, an expanse of rusted car frames, cranes, and forgotten metal. After that, nothing. The GPS went dead, no outgoing calls, no app activity. It was like someone had plucked the device out of reality and dropped it into a void. When the report was finally taken seriously by local authorities, it was already 5 days too late. Her mother had filed it the moment she arrived from Arizona, but the response had been sluggish. By the time they requested access to cell tower data and her digital history, the trail had already cooled. What they found offered little comfort. Her main phone, a black iPhone 13, had stopped transmitting entirely, but her OnlyFans page had remained active. Not in the usual way. No new content, no messages. But her auto-scheduled posts continued, giving the illusion that she was still working, still alive. Investigators leaned into that. Maybe she didn't want to be found. Maybe she ghosted everyone, including her family. Maybe she was on some kind of impulsive escape. But her mother didn't buy it. Dahlia had too much to lose. Rent was due. Her cat needed food. Her audience was loyal but demanding. If she went dark without warning, she risked her entire income stream. Even during her wildest weekends, she always came back. Rosa, her best friend, noticed something else. Dahlia's page had a caption posted the night she vanished. It was just a default caption. Late night vibes. But it had gone up at exactly 11:55 p.m. 8 minutes after the last phone ping. It was scheduled, automated, impersonal. For Rosa, it was confirmation that Dahlia hadn't touched her own account in real time. Whatever happened, it had already happened. The location of that last ping was strange. The salvage yard itself was gated at night. The businesses in the area closed by 6. No security cameras were visible from street level. Behind it was desert, flat, empty land with no reason for someone like Dahlia to be there. It was a ghost zone. Her car hadn't been found, but the lack of surveillance meant they didn't know if it ever left. The investigator assigned to her case requested drone footage from a nearby utility company, hoping to find any trace of headlights or movement that night. Nothing came back. No traffic, no light trails, just stillness. When her mother sat down for a local news interview in early January, it became one of the most watched clips on regional broadcasts. Her voice broke midway through, describing how Dahlia always checked in. Always. Even when they argued, even when she didn't approve of her daughter's work, Dahlia still called her every week. "She's not running," her mother said. "She's gone." The internet grabbed hold of the story quickly. On Reddit, amateur sleuths speculated everything from sex trafficking to a serial killer operating along the 515 corridor. One user posted a map of missing women in Nevada over the past 5 years. Another claimed to be a former client. Someone posted a blurry photo saying it looked like Dahlia at a truck stop in Arizona, but nothing could be verified. Most of it felt like noise. Her friends tried to focus. Rosa set up a dedicated tip line, and flyers went up around Henderson. Dahlia's Instagram followers dropped by almost half within 2 weeks. Her remaining subscribers were torn, some angry they were paying without new content, others deeply concerned. A few offered money for information. One man claimed he had seen her alive in Mesquite, but his story kept changing, and he eventually admitted he just wanted attention. What gnawed at investigators was the location of that final ping. The area had no relevance to Dahlia's known patterns. It wasn't near a club, hotel, or shoot location. There was no logical reason for her to be anywhere near that salvage yard, unless she'd been brought there. They obtained a warrant for the nearest cell tower, logs hoping to identify any other devices that pinged that night in the same window. The logs came back with thousands of entries: drivers, late shift workers, trucks. but 2 unidentified burner phones had also gone dark within 15 minutes of Dahlia's. That detail was never released to the public, but internally it shifted the tone of the investigation. Now they weren't just looking for a missing girl, they were looking for someone who knew exactly how to make 3 phones disappear in the same hour, in the same place. And somewhere inside the silence of that junkyard, behind the rusted gates and the scent of motor oil, her phone was still there. Dead, hidden, or crushed beneath the weight of something meant to never be found. The discovery came by accident. A clerk at a liquor store along East Lake Mead Parkway was reviewing footage from a night shift break-in when he spotted a familiar face. Not the thief, someone else. A young woman driving a white Lexus coupe heading westbound at 11:42 p.m. on December 19th. The timestamp aligned exactly with the window Dahlia Reyes was believed to have vanished. Investigators obtained the footage, and the comparison left no doubt. It was Dahlia. She wasn't with anyone, at least not visibly. Her posture was relaxed, one hand on the wheel, a glow from her phone illuminating the cabin for a split second, before she turned onto a poorly lit road. That road ended near the industrial lot where her phone last pinged. At 11:45 p.m., just 3 minutes later, something strange happened. Security footage from the junkyard's main gate, which faced that same service road, recorded 3 hours of clean, uninterrupted surveillance every night for the past 2 years. But on the night of December 19th, the camera glitched. It cut out for 6 minutes from exactly 11:44 to 11:50 p.m. When the feed resumed, everything looked untouched. The lot was still. The gates were closed. No sign of Dahlia's car ever arriving or leaving. Investigators dug deeper. The salvage yard contracted a private security firm to patrol overnight. Records showed that the night shift guard, a 58-year-old man named Carl Eddington, had clocked in at 8 p.m. and swiped out at exactly 12:18 a.m. Body cam policy wasn't mandatory for contractors, and Carl claimed he didn't notice anything unusual that night. He remembered seeing a few coyotes, hearing some scraping noises out by the west fence, but nothing worth reporting. He didn't recall seeing a white Lexus. When asked about the camera glitch, he shrugged. "That old thing cuts out all the time," he said. But when technicians reviewed the system logs, they found something odd. The camera hadn't failed due to a malfunction. It had been manually disabled. Someone with access had logged into the security panel using an old admin password and temporarily shut off the live feed. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. That revelation changed the course of the case. Detectives went back to Dahlia's digital footprint. Her main phone was gone, but her cloud backups remained partially intact. A forensic technician found a list of client notes she kept for organizing her meetups, coded names, brief descriptions, rate agreements. Most entries were harmless, common usernames or nicknames, but one stood out. Near the bottom of the list, under a date marked just 2 days before she vanished, was an entry. Jake Summerlin, no socials, new sub, high tipper, meetup possible. Wednesday was the 19th. Dahlia had mentioned Jake once in a voice memo to Rosa, just after a lunch meetup a week prior. She'd been casual, slightly amused, saying he was older, definitely not a model, and seemed almost too generous. "Like he's paying not to talk," she'd said. It wasn't uncommon for her to meet clients under strict rules, public place, location shared, safety word text. But Jake wasn't in any of her messaging threads. He wasn't in her payment apps, Venmo, Cash App, nothing. No number, no username. It was as if he'd been erased. The address Dahlia had typed beside his name was vague, just Industrial by Henderson, with no street. That was the only client note that referenced that location. The working theory among detectives was that Dahlia agreed to meet Jake near the salvage yard, likely lured by the promise of cash and discretion. But there were gaps. No sign of her car entering the yard, no witnesses, and still no explanation for how the camera had been disabled. When they questioned the junkyard owner, he denied knowing Dahlia, said Jake didn't work for him. But records showed that 6 months prior, a seasonal contractor named Jacob Witherspoon, mid-40s, no priors, quiet, had done repair work on the fences and camera wiring. He was paid in cash, The number he left was disconnected. Detectives tracked down his listed address in Summerlin. It belonged to a foreclosed property, vacant for months, mail stacked up. A neighbor recalled a man living there briefly, driving an older truck. No sign of a white Lexus was ever seen. They issued a request for public information on Witherspoon. No leads. The name could have been fake or real, but buried under layers of misdirection. The missing 30 minutes, from the last sighting of her car at 11:42 p.m. to the guard's exit at 12:18 a.m., became the heart of the mystery. Dahlia's phone shut off just before midnight. The salvage yard camera blinked out right when she would have arrived, and the only person on record entering or leaving the premises that night was a guard with nothing to hide or everything to lose. But investigators couldn't find a body. No blood, no drag marks, no physical evidence. Without a car or remains, there was no proof a crime had even occurred. Still, behind closed doors, the task force began referring to it not as a missing persons case, but as a probable homicide. One planned by someone who knew how to manipulate cameras, pick a blind spot, and vanish without a trace. And somewhere inside that 30-minute void, Dahlia had either trusted the wrong person or seen something she was never meant to see. At first, the internet cared. Dahlia's story had the kind of combustible elements that true crime forums and TikTok creators gravitate toward. Young, beautiful, active online, vanished without a trace. Within days of her missing persons flyer hitting Twitter, hashtags started circulating. Find Dahlia, vanished in Vegas, another OnlyFans girl gone. Her face appeared on Reddit threads alongside maps, speculative timelines, and crowdsourced theories. Videos flooded TikTok, racking up hundreds of thousands of views. Some were sincere, others were cruel. The worst ones called her disappearance a consequence of the lifestyle. But there was a moment, brief, sharp, when Dahlia became more than a missing person. She became a symbol. Posts comparing her to other women who had disappeared under similar circumstances, models, dancers, creators, gained traction. The kind of cases that quietly fade away unless someone forces them to stay loud. And for about 10 days, the internet was loud. Then, it wasn't. On January 11th, a post on a Facebook true crime group claimed Dahlia had been spotted alive in Ogden, Utah. A blurry photo showed a woman at a gas station with dark hair and a similar build. The woman was disoriented, barefoot, and refused to speak to anyone. Members flooded the comments. Some swore it was her. Others insisted it was clickbait. The story spread fast, amplified by creators chasing content. Detectives responded. Utah authorities followed up. The woman in the image was real, but she wasn't Dahlia. She was a local transient with a history of schizophrenia, identified within a day. But the damage was done. The viral distraction had stolen momentum from Dahlia's investigation, shifted the spotlight, and cast new doubts. Some online began to say she didn't want to be found. Rosa tried to correct the record, but the algorithm had already moved on. Her posts received a fraction of the engagement they did before. She noticed the shift. Once compassionate voices started to fall silent, the trolls got louder. People forgot that Dahlia had a family, a past, a story. They turned her into a cautionary tale, a lesson, a warning. Anything but a person. Back in Las Vegas, the investigation stalled. Leads grew colder by the hour. Detectives began digging into Dahlia's past, hoping that some overlooked detail might unlock a new direction. What they found painted a portrait of someone who had lived a dozen lives before turning 23. Dahlia had entered foster care at age 10 after her mother lost custody during a methamphetamine possession case. She was placed with a family in North Las Vegas, 2 parents, 3 kids, and no shortage of dysfunction. She ran away for the first time at 12, again at 14. She got pregnant at 16 and miscarried. By 17. She was working under-the-table jobs in strip malls. Her file documented survival, not stability. But one name in her case file resurfaced during the review: Jordan Ellsworth. Jordan was a former boyfriend, 5 years older, with a criminal record stretching back a decade. Battery, trespassing, possession. Nothing that stood out. until officers found a restraining order filed by Dahlia in late 2020. It was brief but blunt. She claimed he had threatened to bury her in the desert after she ended the relationship. He'd shown up at her apartment, slashed her tires, and sent her photos of her own front door with captions like, "I see you." The request for protection was granted, but expired in 2021. When detectives tracked him down, Jordan was living in a halfway house near Reno. They questioned him. He denied knowing anything about Dahlia's disappearance, claimed they hadn't spoken in over a year. His alibi checked out. He was attending mandatory counseling sessions and had a GPS monitor from a recent parole violation. No connection to Henderson. But the interviews raised new questions. Jordan told officers that Dahlia had recently messaged him on a burner number. She said she was scared, he said some guy she was dealing with wasn't who he said he was. When asked to produce the messages, he claimed he'd deleted them. That was enough to request a warrant, but the burner was untraceable. Just another dead number in a growing chain of ghosts. Internally, the task force admitted it was beginning to fragment. Resources were limited. The lead detective was reassigned. Tips came slower. The case was still open, but it wasn't active. There were too many maybes, too many holes. Without a body, a car, or a suspect, there was no crime to prosecute. Only silence. Rosa sat in Dahlia's empty apartment one afternoon and scrolled through her last few text messages. She reread them over and over, searching for something. Some tone shift, some coded signal, some clue they'd all missed. There was nothing. Just emojis, inside jokes, and one final message. Wish me luck. And somewhere between the noise of the internet and the stillness of that message, the case began to slide out of public view. She was still missing. But the world was moving on, and the people who had tried to find her were left with the slow, haunting realization that maybe no one ever would. 3 months had passed since Dahlia Reyes vanished, and by early March 2023, her name had already started to disappear from the news cycle. The public's attention had turned elsewhere, and even some within the department quietly assumed the case would remain open only in name. But not everyone had given up. A retired homicide detective named Robert Kincaid, who'd been consulting on cold cases for Las Vegas Metro, kept returning to one place, the Junkyard. Not because of a specific lead, but because something about it never sat right. The camera, glitch, the burner phones, the isolated dead zone. In decades of investigating disappearances, Kincaid had learned to trust the places that didn't make sense. He pushed for a full ground scan of the property, drone sweeps, cadaver dogs, deep ground-penetrating radar. It wasn't easy. The salvage yard spanned nearly 6 acres and was packed with thousands of rusted, stacked, crushed vehicles. Permits were slow to come through. The owner, Ronald Mayfield, resisted every step of the way, citing liability, business disruption, and harassment. But pressure from the department, along with a quiet call from the DA's office, finally opened the gates. On the 3rd day of scanning, the dogs alerted near a corner of the yard where several old cars, stacked 5 high, sat untouched for years. Rusted Cadillacs, a half-crushed school bus, an upside-down pickup with weeds growing through its frame. Beneath the pile, radar showed a disturbance in the soil, something compact, non-metallic, and shallow. Excavation began the following morning. It took 6 hours to reach the source. What they uncovered wasn't what they expected. Buried beneath a sheet of scrap steel and an engine block was a shallow pit containing degraded bones, a skull, ribs, partial limbs. The scene went quiet. For a moment, everyone believed they'd found Dahlia. But when the forensic team arrived, the truth came quickly and anticlimactically. The bones weren't human. They belonged to a large dog, possibly a German shepherd, long dead. The age of the remains couldn't be determined exactly, but they were at least a decade old. Just another false start, another gut punch for a team clinging to hope. The search continued for 3 more days with no further alerts. Still, something had shifted. The excavation triggered a deeper dive into Ronald Mayfield's background. Initially, he'd passed through the investigation with only surface-level scrutiny, no violent record, no direct ties to Dahlia. But now, with eyes on him, buried details started to rise. In 2003, he'd been arrested on suspicion of aggravated assault following a domestic dispute. Charges were dropped after the victim refused to testify. In 2011, he was cited twice for improper disposal of automotive fluids and waste, an EPA violation. Then there was the battery case in 2015. A 19-year-old temp worker at the yard had accused him of forcibly grabbing her arm and cornering her in one of the storage units. The case was sealed in court records after an undisclosed settlement. At the time, Ronald claimed it was a misunderstanding. But now, those dots began to form a pattern. When questioned again, Ronald denied ever meeting Dahlia. He said he didn't know anything about OnlyFans, claimed he was barely online and hadn't worked a night shift in years. But Kincaid noticed his defensiveness change when asked about employees. He couldn't account for everyone who came and went. Too many workers, too much turnover, he said. When pressed for names of subcontractors or short-term help in late 2022, his records turned out to be a mess. Most entries were handwritten, incomplete, or simply missing. One name caught their attention: Jeremiah Wood. Written sloppily in a maintenance log from November 2022, with no phone number, no ID copy, no emergency contact. Ronald said the guy had only worked a few shifts welding fences and left before the new year. But when investigators tried to locate Jeremiah, they hit a wall. There was no address, no DMV record, no current social life. The only Wood in the area matching the name had been deceased since 2017. Kincaid suspected the name was fake, but it planted a new seed. If someone had used the yard as a meeting place, or worse, a dumping ground, Ronald may not have needed to be involved. All it would take was a gate code, a blind spot, and someone who knew how to disappear. The problem was, without a body, they still had nothing. No probable cause to tear up the yard, no forensic evidence linking the location to Dahlia, just a growing collection of inconsistencies and a fading digital echo. And yet, investigators couldn't ignore it. The camera that glitched, the night watchman who saw nothing, the business owner with a sealed assault case, and a contractor who didn't exist. It wasn't enough to prove what happened, but it was enough to believe Dahlia never left that yard, not alive, and that somewhere in the layers of metal, silence, and dirt, something was still buried, waiting to be found. It was late June 2023 when a non-profit environmental team, contracted by the state to survey illegal dumping zones in Clark County, arrived at a stretch of land just east of the Henderson salvage yard. On paper, the land wasn't connected to the junkyard, technically owned by the Bureau of Land Management, but in practice, runoff from the lot spilled into it for years. Most of the soil was compacted desert sand, dry and fractured from heat. But one small patch near the base of a drainage slope stood out. The dirt there was darker, thicker, clay-like. Someone had moved it. Not long ago, a field technician flagged it as an anomaly, not because of what was visible, but because the soil consistency didn't match anything around it. A shallow dig followed, maybe 6 inches deep. Beneath the crusted surface was a warped Tupperware container, wrapped in plastic, sealed with duct tape. The group reported it, and within the hour, law enforcement secured the area. Nobody was prepared for what was inside. Once unsealed, the contents were laid out on a sterile table in the forensics lab. First, a prepaid flip phone, the kind sold in convenience stores with no contract, no traceable registration. Next, 2 USB drives, no labels, both slightly corroded but intact. A folded note, creased and smeared, handwritten in black ink. If I disappear, it was for this. And at the bottom of the container, a tiny Ziploc with a SIM card. The handwriting was rushed but legible. A forensic handwriting analyst compared it to samples from Dahlia's journals and within days confirmed what investigators already feared. It was hers. The contents were rushed to a digital forensics unit in Las Vegas. The prepaid phone held very little, no contacts, no messages, just a few call logs, all placed to one number which had been deactivated months ago. But the USBs were another story. The first drive contained a folder labeled Clients, inside of which were dozens of files, screenshots, images, short videos. Dahlia had apparently been keeping quiet records of certain subscribers, men she believed were lying about who they were, men who asked for things that crossed boundaries. Some files included usernames matched to local phone numbers, IP logs, and Cash App transactions. A few had actual names, but the second USB went further. It wasn't just transactional records. It contained what appeared to be audio recordings, 6 of them, secretly made on her phone during in-person meetings. They weren't high quality, and some were corrupted, but one stood out. A 43-minute file simply titled Meetup December 16th. In it, a man's voice can be heard, distorted by background noise and distance, talking about safety, rules, and not telling anyone. Dahlia is heard pushing back, softly, cautiously, but her tone shifts halfway through. She goes silent for long stretches. Near the end of the recording, the man says something barely audible. "You're smart to save this, but it won't help you if you vanish." The audio ends with the sound of a door closing. The note, the files, the voice. It all pointed to one thing. Dahlia had known she was in danger. Maybe not from one person, but from something bigger. A pattern, a system. She had started documenting it quietly, compiling digital insurance, stashing it somewhere no one would find it unless something happened to her. She had buried it beneath clay. Investigators immediately began connecting the men identified in her files. Some names were partial, just usernames or emails. Others led to real people. One was a corrections officer in Clark County. Another, a nightclub owner with prior charges that never stuck. One name appeared 3 separate times, J. Wood. It matched the alias listed in the salvage yard's work records, the same alias no one could track. Police submitted subpoenas, but everything moved slowly. Each man denied knowing Dahlia. Their attorneys demanded proof and dismissed the USB contents as fabricated. The chain of custody was attacked in preemptive motions. But one truth was undeniable. Someone wanted that cash hidden. And Dahlia had gone through great effort to make sure, if she vanished, it wouldn't vanish with her. Kincaid, the retired detective still consulting the case, called the discovery a breadcrumb trail built by someone who knew she was running out of time. He pushed to prioritize the USB evidence, but the department was split. Without a body, they couldn't call it a homicide. Without a crime scene, the files were just pieces of a puzzle with no final image. But the narrative was changing. She hadn't just disappeared. She'd prepared for it, which meant she knew something, or someone, and she feared they'd silence her before she could speak. By the end of July, the data was still being processed, the names still under quiet scrutiny. But a shift had occurred. Now, instead of searching for Dahlia Reyes, they were searching for what she left behind. And that tiny container buried in the clay had just cracked the silence wide open. The files weren't neatly organized. They were scattered, unindexed, scattered across folders labeled with odd names: Nina Proof, Hotel Noise, deleted backups, and simply Last. The forensic team spent days combing through it all, and what emerged wasn't just a list. It was a timeline. Screenshots of payment receipts, audio clips recorded from behind hotel doors, blurry photos of license plates, text messages with men begging for discretion, and usernames, dozens of them. Most led nowhere. Random strings of letters, anonymous profiles. But a few didn't. A few were tied to real people, and some of those people had power. One account linked to a sitting city council member in North Las Vegas. Another traced back to a corrections officer in Clark County. Then, there was a man whose name appeared in 3 different folders, a well-known strip club owner with locations in Reno, Laughlin, and Las Vegas. His real name didn't appear in any of the messages, but a distinct tattoo on his hand was visible in a selfie he'd sent Dahlia through a private messaging app. It was a smoking skull, identical to one he'd flaunted on his business's Instagram years earlier. The match was undeniable. One file was a voice memo Dahlia had left for herself, labeled Client Note Audio. In it, her tone was steady but tense. She listed names, partial dates, locations, amounts. "Some of these guys are nervous," she said. "One said if this ever got out, he'd lose everything. Another one told me not to be stupid. I think he meant it." She paused, then added, "I'm not trying to blow anyone up. I just want to survive. I just want a backup plan." It became clear that Dahlia hadn't been running some kind of extortion ring. She wasn't threatening men for money. She was building leverage, quietly, carefully. She had been in dangerous situations before, clients who crossed lines, men who followed her home. She knew what it meant to be vulnerable in a world where the rules bent in favor of the people who paid. The list wasn't about revenge. It was about insurance. Still, a few entries were more aggressive. One screenshot showed a blurred conversation with a client who offered her double to delete a video. Another email thread had a subject line that read, "You send that and I swear to God," followed by a blank reply. And yet, she never stopped documenting. She just got quieter, smarter. The most chilling detail wasn't a message or a file. It was a pattern. One name appeared again and again across her notes, recordings, and payment logs. JW. The initials came up in 4 different folders. One audio file captured her whispering the name, asking someone on a call, "What's your real name? Is it Jeremiah? Jason?" The reply was inaudible. But the initials remained. Investigators tried to identify anyone tied to those letters. The only clue was the earlier alias from the Junkyard, Jeremiah Wood, a name no one could trace. They cross-referenced employment records, known offenders, even former tenants in the area. Still nothing. No digital footprint, no clear suspect. But if Dahlia mentioned him this often, and if she feared him enough to bury a cache of files in the clay, JW wasn't just another name. He was something more. Possibly someone who knew the system well enough to stay invisible. A photo embedded in one of the folders showed the outside of a motel. A crumpled receipt in the corner showed the name of a nearby 24-hour diner. Surveillance footage from that night was long erased, but the timestamp matched the final week of her life. And in the background of that photo, half obscured by reflection, was a man's figure. Wearing a hat, standing beside a pickup truck, the same make and model that had been flagged during the earlier Junkyard investigation. The pieces didn't snap into place cleanly, but the shape was becoming clearer. Dahlia had been maneuvering through a minefield, not just of risky clients, but of men who had money, status, and motive to keep her quiet. She'd seen something, or someone, she wasn't supposed to, and she hadn't waited for someone to protect her. She'd tried to protect herself. The question wasn't whether the files on the USBs were real. It was why someone thought she couldn't be allowed to keep them. And with the initials JW appearing again and again, investigators couldn't help but wonder. Was she blackmailing him, running from him, or was she trying to warn someone before he caught up to her? The initials had been circling the case like static. JW, mentioned in emails, audio clips, her handwritten notes. At first, investigators assumed it was an alias, a client she couldn't or wouldn't identify. But after combing through employment logs from the salvage yard again, buried in a maintenance roster from November 2022, they found a name that hadn't been flagged in the initial background checks: Jeremiah Wood. A part-time welder hired off books for minor fencing repairs and electrical patchwork. He worked 6 nights, then was let go. The reason, written casually in a manager's notebook, read, "Inappropriate behavior. Staff discomfort. Fired." Nobody followed up on it. At the time, Jeremiah seemed like a low-level contractor with no digital presence and no direct tie to Dahlia. But when a cold case investigator reopened the Junkyard logs after the USB cache surfaced, his name stood out, especially given how often JW appeared in Dahlia's files. They pulled what they could. No social media, no criminal record, no listed home address. But DMV data confirmed a match: Jeremiah Allen Wood, 44. A former mechanic with scattered employment across Nevada and Arizona, no family listed. The file was thin. Then came the discovery that changed everything. In January 2023, just 3 weeks after Dahlia disappeared, Jeremiah Wood's pickup truck was found abandoned and burned off a service road near Nogales, Arizona, miles from the Mexico border. The VIN had been scratched off, but parts of the engine block ID were still visible. It took months for the vehicle to be identified, and by the time it was linked to Jeremiah, he was already gone. His last confirmed financial transaction was a gas station purchase outside Tucson. After that, silence, no debit card use, no phone activity, and most damning, no border checkpoint records. Yet, according to a flagged report from DHS, a man matching Jeremiah's description was seen crossing on foot through a gap in the fence near Sonoita, Sonora, a few days after his vehicle was found. No photo. Just a verbal account from a Border Patrol agent who remembered him because of a visible burn scar on his forearm. Investigators now faced an uncomfortable truth. Dahlia had written down his initials. She'd recorded his voice, maybe not clearly, but enough to scare her. She'd buried evidence that seemed to tie back to him. And now, he is gone. Disappeared. No forwarding address, no digital footprint, no family asking questions. A man nobody had questioned in her case because, on paper, he was irrelevant, disposable, forgettable. The kind of man who knew how to stay under the radar because his life had already taught him how. Digging deeper, they learned Jeremiah had once lived in a trailer park on the outskirts of Pahrump, Nevada. Records showed he'd been evicted multiple times, had frequent complaints for loud arguments, and was rumored to have a violent temper. A former neighbor remembered seeing young women come and go at odd hours. Nothing illegal ever stuck. He drifted, worked just long enough to pay rent, then disappeared again. What chilled investigators most was that no one, not even his last employer, reported him missing. No one seemed to care that he had vanished. It was like he slipped through a crack in the system, just like Dahlia had. The working theory became clearer. Dahlia met someone, likely Jeremiah, on a private client thread. Maybe he used a fake name. Maybe she didn't know who he really was until it was too late. She sensed something off, documented it, took screenshots, recorded audio, and when she realized she'd gotten in too deep, she buried everything she had, hoping someone would find it, and hoping it would matter. There was no proof Jeremiah had killed her. Nobody. No eyewitnesses, just a string of circumstantial pieces that lined up a little too cleanly. A man with motive, means, and the perfect opportunity. A man who, 3 weeks after she vanished, torched his truck and walked across the border with no intention of returning. The district attorney declined to issue a warrant. There wasn't enough, and unless Dahlia's remains were found, the case would remain a missing persons file, one of hundreds. But to those who knew her, the answer was already written between the lines. She didn't just guess the initials. She didn't document him by accident. She left that trail for a reason. And now, the man she feared most was gone too. Whether he was hiding or hiding something, no one could say. But one thing was certain. J.W. wasn't just another client. He wasn't a name in a folder. He was the last real threat she ever mentioned. And now, he was a ghost. It was late February 2024 when construction resumed on the undeveloped eastern lot of the salvage yard. The property had recently changed hands after Ronald Mayfield sold it to a third-party logistics company, and with new permits in place, heavy machinery returned to level the land for an expanded vehicle lot. No one expected the work to intersect with an active cold case. The crew assigned to trenching for septic upgrades wasn't looking for anything other than buried piping or rebar. But a backhoe operator noticed something unusual beneath the cracked foundation of an old outbuilding. Concrete, circular, and sealed too cleanly for its age. It didn't look like standard utility infrastructure. It looked deliberate. They paused the dig and reported it to the site supervisor. Within hours, police were on scene. What they uncovered beneath the hardened slab was a rusted makeshift septic tank, sealed with layers of cement and wrapped with sheets of tin, as if someone had wanted it hidden but not entirely reinforced. The hatch had been welded shut and covered with loose soil. When it was finally breached, the stench was immediate. Inside were fragments of bone, compacted and discolored, a melted synthetic wig, a handbag partially burned, and something else, a small, tarnished charm bracelet caught in the sludge near the bottom corner. The bracelet wasn't valuable, but it was distinctive, a thin silver band with a tiny crescent moon charm. Rosa had given it to Dahlia on her 21st birthday. She wore it constantly, in photos, live streams, even while filming content. When Rosa saw the evidence photo, she broke down. She didn't need the DNA results to know, but the lab confirmed it anyway. The bones belonged to Dahlia Reyes. News broke before police were ready to go public. A local journalist leaked the story on Twitter, and by morning, national outlets were running the headline, "Remains of missing OnlyFans creator, found in Nevada junkyard." The comments were as cruel as they were predictable. Some blamed her, some mocked the search. Others questioned why it took over a year to find a body buried within a property police had searched twice. Internally, the department knew why. The septic tank hadn't appeared on the original lot diagrams. The area had been marked as undeveloped, overgrown with discarded parts and fencing materials. Search dogs had passed nearby but not directly over it. And the tank itself, sealed and buried, hadn't released any organic scent until it was disturbed. She had been less than 150 feet from where her phone last pinged, hidden in plain sight. The coroner's report was brief. Blunt force trauma to the head. No other injuries identified due to the condition of the remains. Estimated time of death, between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. on December 19, 2022. Cause of death, homicide. Investigators reopened the case as a murder investigation. But the leads were old. Jeremiah Wood was still missing. No confirmed sightings, no trace of him on either side of the border. Ronald Mayfield, though cooperative, denied any knowledge of the tank's existence. The welder logs from that year were incomplete, and the subcontractors couldn't recall who'd worked which section of the property. There were no fingerprints, no surveillance, just a body left underground in silence and the trail of digital warnings she'd left behind. The septic tank itself had once been used legally by the original yard owners decades ago. The tank had been sealed off during expansion, but never removed. Someone had known it was there, someone had returned, dug it open, disposed of her remains, covered it again. Then I walked away. The forensic team tried to extract more from the evidence found inside. The melted handbag revealed a partially intact ID card, signed but readable. A clump of synthetic hair was still fused to a clip she'd worn in videos just days before she vanished. Nothing pointed directly to a killer, but the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. She had tried to unearth the truth, and someone had buried her to stop it. Rosa organized a small vigil near the site once the crime scene tape came down. Just a handful of people, no cameras, no headlines. They laid down candles, flowers, and printed photos of Dahlia from better days, smiling, bold, alive. There was no arrest, no press conference, no one to answer for the year of silence. But there was one brutal certainty. She had been right. The fear she carried, the files she buried, the warnings she whispered into voice memos. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. And in the end, what she feared most had happened. But so had what she'd hoped for. Someone had found what she left behind. Someone had listened. And beneath the wreckage of steel and secrets, she was no longer missing. She was found. The box of evidence sat locked in a climate-controlled vault beneath the Clark County Justice Center. Inside were the 2 USB drives, the prepaid burner, phone, the SIM card, the recovered voice recordings, and the handwritten note. If I disappear, it was for this. The files, once reviewed and cataloged, had been absorbed into an active case file, but no charges had been filed in connection with Dahlia's death. Instead, 3 names from her list had surfaced in separate investigations over the following months. One, a local corrections officer, was indicted for bribery and obstruction. Another, a city councilman, quietly resigned after financial disclosures revealed suspicious transfers. The third, a business owner operating adult venues in Nevada and Arizona, was arrested for tax evasion and later connected to a human trafficking sting. None of them were publicly linked to Dahlia Reyes. When asked about these developments, the department released a carefully worded statement. The investigation remains open. All evidence is being reviewed in coordination with federal partners. No further comment at this time. Behind closed doors, sources confirmed that portions of the USB contents were redacted under sealed court orders. Whatever Dahlia had exposed, it had reached further than anyone expected. Her mother refused to let it end there. In a television interview that aired months after Dahlia's remains were found, she sat quietly for most of it, composed, steady, until the final question. When the reporter asked her whether she had closure, her voice broke. She said, "You don't bury someone you killed unless you think no one's ever going to come looking. My daughter made sure someone would. She didn't leave quietly. She left a map." To the public, the case faded again. No new arrests, no named suspects, no final press conference. The final coroner's report listed the manner of death as homicide, but left the responsible party listed as unknown. Dahlia's name appeared briefly on a memorial list at a local awareness event for missing women, but by late 2024, her story had largely moved offline. Her OnlyFans profile was memorialized. Her last active posts remained frozen in time, a curated digital echo of a girl who had already sensed the end creeping in. The subreddit that Rosa created was still live. Every few weeks, someone posted a theory, a memory, or an old photo. A few sleuths still combed through data, still believed there were more USBs out there, more files, more names not yet uncovered. One user claimed there had been a third drive. Another swore the initials JW appeared in a separate trafficking case out of New Mexico, but no link could be proven. The conversation continued quietly, beneath the surface, like a second investigation carried out by people who couldn't let it go. The salvage yard was leveled by the end of the year. New fencing, asphalt, and lighting replaced the rusted graveyard where Dahlia had been hidden for over a year. The company that bought the land never acknowledged the case publicly, but local workers claimed that some days, when deliveries arrived, late at night, the site still felt wrong, like something had been buried there that never really left. Investigators who'd worked the case for months admitted in interviews, off the record, that it had haunted them. The fact that she had seen it coming, that she had documented it, that she had warned them. And still, it hadn't been enough. They said she was too careful to be careless, too strategic to be impulsive. Everything she'd hidden had been intentional. What she uncovered couldn't be tied to just one man. It was systemic. A network of people who had learned to exploit the cracks in the system where visibility didn't equal safety and independence became vulnerability. She wasn't trying to bring them down. She was trying to survive them. Rosa visits the site once a month. Not the grave, there was no burial, just a small urn in her mother's home, but the edge of the industrial property line where the clay turned red and the drainage ditch still carries runoff out into the basin. She doesn't bring flowers, she doesn't light candles, she just walks the border and listens. She says sometimes, if the wind is right, she can almost hear her. Dahlia Reyes wasn't just another missing girl. She left behind more than questions. She left proof. Names, recordings, accounts, patterns. She did what most never have the chance or the foresight to do. She documented her own murder before it happened, and in 2024, someone finally found what she buried, not just to solve a mystery, but to make sure her voice was the last thing her killers could never erase.